Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Rookies, and thanks so much for tuning into this live stream. Much appreciated. I hope everyone's having a wonderful Monday and having a very wonderful and safe start to either to the start of your day or to the end of your day. So aside for this one, I'm going to bounce over, just looking over a few of the rookie submissions on the Rookies website, along with a bunch of that were shared over the Game Development channel on the Rookies. So, without further ado, let's get started. So we have Philip Carson, Vince TV, Rookies level. Straight like looking at this, like I can see like straight out of the gate, like the quality bar is really high for, and it seems to get higher and higher every time I check out stuff from the rookie submissions. You guys really are nailing it with the quality bar, and it's just looking great overall. Yeah, so. The topology is really nice. I think he's done a really good job at optimizing. There's a lot of he hasn't wasted any additional edge loops. Like everything's connected in such a optimized manner. He's welded, vertices where you'd be, and just using geometry where only necessary as well. So definitely the first thing that stands out is great use of topology. I guess the curious question I would have is, considering the right and left side of this guy, has he mirrored these, or is it just do all these share like unique UVs? I guess we'll see the further we go down. Again, really nice details on like the little cover section here, and just underneath like the text here, and just a lot of like subtle details in like the roughness map. You can kind of see a lot of that coming through, just like little stains, a little dirt, just a little kind of grime and just dust details, which are really nice. And you can see it here as well. You got a lot of that coming through, which is really nice. I think for this it would have been really cool. Maybe just see some kind of like painting or like peeling of like the logo label on the inside of this guy. That would have been a pretty neat little touch, just to give it some character. And these guys are using an emissive texture, so it'd be cool to kind of have just like a slight kind of like gradient around the edges of these, so it just makes them pop just a wee bit when it comes to the emissive texture. Same with this guy here, just a subtle little gradient around the edge. I guess like when I look at details like this, I wonder, when this guy's done the UV layout for this, has he basically just mirrored these guys as a single UV, or are they all different other unique UVs? Okay, overall this looks awesome. Just to run some feedback notes through, I think the first thing that stands out to me is I'm getting like this kind of blue light. I kind of be careful where you kind of shine at, because it's kind of showing a lot of these areas as like, it looks like you have like a gray plastic and then like a purple. So just like the viewer could see it and think, oh, why is this purple? So just kind of something to keep an eye out. I'd probably keep this like in neutral lighting. I wouldn't really bother using like purples or blues. You could probably add like a slight kind of orangey warm color lighting on it instead. Overall, it's looking really, really nice. Probably go for just some subtle edge wear as you have here, but maybe just kind of lighter kind of contrasty colors. You could probably add some just like color variation to the middle points. So like you got like the side section, maybe you can kind of just increase the brightness a little bit, just so it kind of just shows just general aging of the material, the plastic color. Probably on the top as well. Maybe just some like subtle dirt in the crevices. I can see there's a lot of little subtle dirt details in these guys, which is really nice. Obviously, don't ever be afraid to kind of like in areas that are extruded inwards to decrease to kind of like paint color in and just darken it a wee bit, so it gives you that kind of like visual push between the interior extruded pieces and the exterior. Even if they're just baked down as a flat surface, it just really helps to kind of sell that. The weight grain flow is the right direction, which is awesome. Sometimes that can be kind of a pitfall for people. I like that you have like this subtle edge wear as well on the edge, and you have kind of like this, it's almost like these two metal or these two wooden pieces connect, and it's kind of just baked down in the low poly. That's nice. Or in the norm map side, it's a really nice touch. It just kind of makes it feel like married together and more kind of assembled. These details are really nice as well. Again, I'd just be careful with this kind of like consistent, like this kind of edgeware detail on the wood. I'd probably go for, instead of it kind of being just consistent, like, like stroke, 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 I'd probably kind of break it up. Maybe just have somewhere in the bottom, just in the center point, just so it feels more like they're just random points of impact. Again, down here in the bottom right, just kind of just a bit more like wear and tear. Don't be afraid to go over like the metal part and add like just roughness variation. So like maybe there's just like kind of just general staining on the top surface. But overall, I mean, this is looking like a solid asset for a rookie level candidate. Like that's honestly amazing work. I'd say the one thing I would probably do is to give this extra love, just go in and kind of just adjust the huge color a little bit on the wood. Maybe just kind of add a bit of like aging to it, or kind of just general color change, or just maybe just lightening up the edges of it, or just like the center point, just to give it just a bit more kind of variation. But overall, this is definitely a solid asset. Especially the topology, I'm super impressed by it, and I'm super impressed how you utilize your low poly versus your bakes. So you kind of leaned on the norm map to do a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to like your grill details, like this guy over here, this back section with like the text and extruded pieces. Like this is really good, because if you think about it, players are never going to get close enough to this guy to actually be able to see this stuff as geometry. So again, really awesome work on that front. Yeah, honestly, I say it was a lot of fun on the project. I mean, it speaks for itself. Like you can see that you had a blast on this. So yeah, that's awesome. So next we have the Candy Cart by Ava. This is like really, really cool. It has kind of like, it reminds me of like the assets from like Bioshock Infinite. It just has that kind of like style, like the vibe to it. I think this is it's a really, really strong portfolio piece. I think your materials read really, really well. I guess the question I would have looking at this is like, how many texture sets did you use for this guy? I wonder, maybe when we scroll down further, there might be a breakdown of that. But I love it. I love how you did the signage as well, like the anti-signage. That's so cool, and like the flags. It's almost like they're like, I don't know if these guys are like maybe like color palette examples of the ice cream you can get, but I just think the presentation's so nice. And then like you got like this banner on the top. I can see that you use like an alpha texture to kind of just go in and just create some like random rips and tears around it, which is a really, really nice detail. Heavenly Candy. That's honestly, this is like a 10 out of 10 portfolio piece. And again, I like kind of the colors and the contrast between them all. It all kind of just blends really nice, and I like that you have like this kind of cobble grind section on it as well. I'd say what I probably would do for like this guy, just as like a kind of nitpicky kind of feedback, I'd probably go in and kind of just blur the edges a wee bit more, so you have that kind of like fall off from like the cobble grind to just like the background. But overall, yeah, this is solid, really, really good portfolio piece. And I love that you have all these like the little candy cans, like the chocolate like cylinder things, like the little balls, like all that is so nice. But probably if it was me going into this guy, I'd probably like just maybe just do the wood on the side, like the wooden panel side sections, just more love. I'd probably go in and just sort of like kind of desaturate them a wee bit in the center, just some hue changes, kind of just to make it feel more lived in. And maybe some like dirt and mud around the bottom of the wheels, and it can be like super subtle. It doesn't have to be like super heavy. I like that you included the cardboard box. It kind of just gives you like a scale. You can kind of like see this and like, oh, this is pretty big. And maybe these guys here, maybe like you have the consistent kind of rolling, red and white. Maybe you could have a variant of this where it's like blue and white, or like green and white. Maybe that kind of, maybe this is like the accent color for the assets. So you got like the red, and then all the woods red as well. And you can maybe have a variant where maybe it's like instead of red, it's like a bright blue. You know, maybe the materials along the side, like metal sections, maybe all that changes as well. But honestly, this looks great. So I guess looking at this, one thing that kind of stand out to me is I would like to kind of really see like the presentation on this and the art quality itself is awesome, but I would really like to see kind of how you basically utilize kind of like how many texture sets are in this single asset and how you've assembled those and how you've assembled the UVs as well. I think that would be a really good kind of insight, especially to a potential employer, just to kind of see how you approach this stuff. I mean, like your set dressing and your assembly is so nice, and I can see even like on this rope section, you've baked this down as a texture instead of it being two single ropes, like cinder meshes, which is really, really good. And you can see this guy's baked down as well. That's so nice. Especially all the detail in this guy. You know, you can see that you've really spent a lot of time giving this a lot of detail and attention, which is really, really nice. And just like sort of like this flaky wood aging is really cool. It looks really nice. The one thing I would say is just watch the scale of your the knots and the grain detail on your wood. So we can see like the base of this guy, it's pretty small, but then when you look at the actual like table section, it's much larger. I'd probably, if I was to work on this, I'd probably honestly bring this or increase the repetition of the grain on the larger wooden planks. I mean, it wouldn't have to be 1-to-1 with this guy because then that would mean it would be like very small and very noisy, but it would at least bring it down just a wee bit so it doesn't seem like it's super stretched. You know, and then the side of this guy here, just watch your wood grain. You know, anything that kind of has stuff like this usually flows vertically. It wouldn't be horizontally. But overall, really nice. I love how you have all the subtle detail in the corners and the metal sections. It really makes me very curious to see how you kind of approach this stuff. Sorry. But overall, yeah, this is such a wonderful asset. Project organization, managing insane assets to reduce render time, advanced texture, and create a lot of assets for each returning concept. That would be honestly my only feedback note for this is just if you could do a breakdown of that stuff, just show some wireframes, show like an asset breakdown of like these are like the props that are in the scene, you know, which ones share texture sets, you know, do they all have unique texture sets, what are the resolutions, what's the total tries count, just a lot of those stuff would just really kind of give studios and recruiters kind of just an insight to sort of how you approach this and how you assemble it. I mean, if this, for example, if you were doing this for a game, you could as a prefab either in Unity or in Unreal, where you basically have like, you know, maybe the sign as a separate mesh, maybe you got like this kind of wagon section as a mesh, and then you know you're kind of just basically set dressing this as it is, and then you just populate the environment just with a single prefab with all these details. Yeah, just something to keep in mind. But honestly, otherwise, kind of car looks awesome. So next we have Damien, who posted on the Discord channel. Thanks so much for sharing your work. Really appreciate it. So it's an environment artist from France. Long time look at Garcia only by drawing, refused to use 3D. I discovered it 1.5 years ago and I love it. So that's awesome for you for doing 3D for a year and a half. This stuff already looks very impressive. Project School, Unity HDRP, first environment. Props made by 3D Max. Ground World Creator, Vegetation Comes, Specs Max down, Speed Trade. Awesome. Overall, this looks great. I think it's really nice. A few things kind of stand out to me, and I look at this, and the first is I can see in the chair we have like just like kind of like subtle smoothing group differences on the edge. I think when you're creating something like this, it probably wouldn't hurt just to have the actual top base of the chair as one smoothing group. if you're doing like high to low poly bakes, even if you're not, you can still do it that way. It just reads a lot nicer. The axe looks really nice. I'd probably, if I was to go in and color it, I'd probably just kind of again just give it more wear and tear along the wooden section. Maybe just kind of desaturate the middle of the wooden handle, just for a bit more kind of visual push. The mushrooms are really nice. I'd probably go in and just either like scale some of them down or just change the color variation on the top, just add a wee bit variation to it. Same with the shed as well. I feel like when you kind of look at everything else in the scene, I feel like these planks are quite large. I'd probably, let's see how many are here. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Probably see if you can bring it down to like 10 planks, just kind of like scale them down a wee bit and give it just a bit more kind of, so it just feels more kind of in scale with everything else in scene. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, probably the same inside as well. Just around the exterior of this little like hut or shed. And again, I'd watch your scaling as well, because you know when you kind of like look at this guy here, you can see kind of like the barrels are reading quite large versus, you know, and so does the seat. The seat feels quite large in comparison to the barrel. If you're working on Unreal or Unity, don't be afraid to bring like a little mannequin guy in and just sort of place him around the scene and use that as like your sense of scale. And you'll find in time, the more that you do it, the more you'll become familiar with scale, and you'll just kind of know when things are kind of just the right length and width. Probably again with these wooden planks here, they just feel quite large in comparison to the planks in the building. I can see the logic to this for sure, but I'd probably bring this down just a wee bit, just a little bit shorter. Overall, the assembly is really nice. It reads really well. The lighting's really nice. I like the shadow. You can see it coming through the tree. You can see the tree kind of reflecting off the ground. Just the lighting and assembly for the amount of time you've been doing 3D is really, really nice. And I feel just with that extra little bit of attention to the construction of your assets and the quality of your assets, you'll be honestly so close to hitting like really high quality level portfolio. And we've got the Viking Village. Oh wow, this looks really cool. Training fast environment, Vikings Village. So I guess the question I would have is, you know, I can see there's like a depth of field effect. You know, like these birds, for example, is this like a Photoshop or like they just static meshes that are kind of just in, you know, position for the shot? You know, the background looks really nice. I really like the construction. Like you get the construction of the exterior walls and the walkways really like proper thought. I'm sure you probably definitely used reference for this, which is always very, very important when constructing environments, especially if you're trying to match like an existing Viking village, just making sure it's really one-to-one. Especially like the sparks coming out of these guys is really cool, and the lighting. I can see that you've added some like this kind of old shrubby grass, which is really cool. But yeah, overall the scene composition is really nice. The lighting's really nice, and it all just reads really well. So honestly, for a year and a half, like congrats! Like your stuff is really on the right track, and I'm very excited to see what you do ahead. So next we have Jonas Clausen from Germany, another guy I posted on Discord. I had a look at your work before the live stream, and honestly, I think it looks really, really nice. So let's start with your cult. So I think it reads really well. You know, I can see that you've really given the geometry a lot of attention, and you've made sure that all the curves are just super smooth. There's no visible faceting, which is really important. Especially when you're working on a weapon and it being so close to the screen. We can see this guy is 9.3 trice or 9.3k trice, which is ideal. It's definitely a good kind of ballpark figure for your geometry. 4K texture. Yeah, this looks great. I really like how it reads. I'd say the one feedback note I would have is I can see that if you've done a high poly bake of this guy, I would probably inflate your edges just a wee bit more because they are reading just a little sharp along the edges. And I know this is probably more realistic one-to-one with weapons, but when it comes to games, inflating these guys, it just reads a lot nicer when you do your high poly bake. So that is basically, you're just inflating all of the edges of your high poly mesh. And you can keep the topology the same on your low poly, but then when you bake your normal knock down, you just kind of have that kind of like thicker edge bevel, which just looks so much nicer. The second feedback note would be your roughness map. I feel like when the light hits it like this, it just feels very one, like just there's like a single slate roughness detail across it. There's not enough there, like the grip section versus metal. You know, you would think that because this is like a plastic, it probably wouldn't be reflecting the light as much as the metal, so it'd be a lot duller. You know, maybe more dirt. You know, maybe where the hands is, it's even rougher from just kind of that consistent, you know, someone holding it. And then I'd probably go in and just, you know, adjust your roughness on the metal sections as well, just to kind of give it just a bit more variation. You know, maybe you could darken sections of it. You know, just anything that really allows you to kind of just push things a little bit further in terms of detail. Because, as I always say, your textures are always the most expensive part of an asset. So the more that you can do with your textures for an asset, the better. And don't be afraid to go in and even just add like some custom like details like marker or stuff on the side of it, or just some further scratches on the front for maybe where it's made contact with the holster or just a surface. Again, I can see the renders are really nice. But again, I feel if you just go in and just give it that extra, if you go in and just redo the bake and just inflate your edges just a wee bit more, when the light hits it, the edges won't feel as sharp. They'll be just a little thicker, which will just read so much nicer. And if you go in and just do some more work on the roughness map, because I can see the specular map coming through, you can see all the discoloration on the metal, which is so nice. Really good work, but if you just go in and add some roughness variation to it, it'll make it pop so much more. Overall, really good asset. The quality's there. You can see that you've utilized your textures really well. As you can see from the lighting, your edges do like the thing is your geometry, like your mesh itself, is really nice, but you can see that because the edges are so sharp on the bake, when the light hits it, it just feels very low poly. So if you inflate your edges and just, you know, you don't have to worry about your actual geometry itself, and a lot nicer. So for example, we can see here that on this guy, you have like just simple kind of like edge loops, simple topology, which is honestly perfect. But again, just adjusting your high poly will allow you to maintain this while just kind of pushing your bake and your chamfered edges just a bit further on the high poly. And again, we can see that you've really made sure that all your cylinders are all fully round. Sorry. I'd say for this guy here, I'd probably go in and just chamfer this a wee bit more. So you have this kind of natural, nice flow kind of happening around here. And then when it hits here, there's just some slight little faceting. I'd probably just, you know, chamfer this a wee bit more, just so there's just a consistent fluid curvature. But overall, it's looking really, really good. So it's all right from Halo. Not go. 16 contrast. So again, I think for this guy, what I'd probably do if I was to like revisit the high poly for this, I just again push your edges just a wee bit further so they're not sharp, and just redo your bake. I feel like the plastic could just use a little bit more attention and love on it. You know, you can go in, it gives you plenty of opportunity to go in and just kind of rough up the middle sections of it, like so the center parts where you can just, you know, maybe parts that make more contact with the Master Chief's arm. You know, same in the back here, you could just kind of add that roughness variation, you know, some edge wear around the edges, just even some tears and rips on the fabric of the rubber itself. Same down here as well. Probably just down here, just add more detail. I probably wouldn't have this as kind of heavy on the edge wear. It just feels very consistent. And it feels like the only way that this could possibly have this amount of edge wear if it was like consistently used as like a melee weapon or just kind of consistent contact with a surface here. So I'd probably really pull back on this and just sort of add it more to the areas that make sense. For example, the bottom section here is probably more than likely to be in contact with anything else versus the top section under the plastic, or just more like the inner extruded parts. And same here as well, there just seems to be a lot of excessive edge wear. So I'd really just pull back on that and kind of just place it in areas that make sense. And same here, I'd probably just kind of pull back on it here as well. I think one really cool idea would be to see kind of how you approached the UVs for this guy. Because it's really good that you're showing your wireframe shots, but showing your UV layout would really help not only kind of with feedback on the best ways to optimize your UVs, but also to kind of just give studios an idea of how you where you currently are with them and how you approach them. So this is really nice. It's golden, like the quality of the materials look really, really well. But there's a few things that stand out to me, and the first is I can see kind of like on the side sections, I feel like the grain is flowing just sort of the wrong direction. You know, you're kind of going horizontal here, but as you go up the gun, it sort of becomes vertically, almost vertically. I'd probably try and, you know, if you look at any real world weapon, you'll see that the grain flows consistently across the wood itself. So I just probably revisit this and make sure it's kind of following how it's down around the stock area. Yeah, so for example, if you're working on this guy, I'd probably bring this grain just down a wee bit, so scale it down so it's more repeating here, and then just have it flow consistently across. So it's going horizontal here and it flows rather than going horizontal to like diagonal. Same here as well. You think about it, this section has been cut out of two pieces of wood, so they'd be flowing the same direction. You wouldn't be getting like kind of this bowing in the grain, or like this kind of like diagonal down diagonal. Just something to keep in mind. I'm so sorry. I'm currently at the second moment. Yeah, so I go in and probably just inflate these edges a wee bit more in your high poly. Because I feel like if you look at this guy from a distance, if your edges are a lot more kind of chamfered in your high poly and you get that bake down, it would read much, much nicer. Because you see, like the further you get from it, it starts to lose that once the pixels get smaller. And what can happen is if you have this guy on screen, the further you get from it and the edges are super sharp, it's going to start like shimmering on screen and aliasing. And it's because the more that you have the edges inflated on a high poly bake in your normal map, even if the geometry is simple, the more it holds up at a distance. And generally, rule by thumb, it just looks much, much nicer. Again, I just watch your smoothing groups here. I just feel like there's just some weirdness happening with the normal map. So just double check that. and see if there's any visible bowing or bending in your normal bake. Same here as well. We can see there's slight pinching in your smoothing groups. Just double check that. Same this side as well. And then again, on like surfaces like this, don't be afraid to go in and, you know, maybe wherever his fingers come in contact with this section, you know, you could add more roughness variation. So you could like rough up the center of this, you know, maybe around this section here. Just kind of like just general aging. I do like that you have like well detail. That's really cool. Again, same here. I just maybe add just some like roughness variation here. And like the beauty of an asset like this with a lot of metal, you know, sections of it and metalness in the detail, it allows you to really kind of go to town on it and add all of that roughness variation that you want to add. It just gives you a lot of room to play with that. So, for example, you could add it really around the bolt in this section where the hand comes in contact to pull it back. You know, maybe around the trigger. I do like that you have some dirt going on here on top of the trigger. I think it's always important, as you have here, to kind of like any areas that like come into contact with each other, just add some dust or dirt to kind of just make it feel married and like feel all like cohesive, so it doesn't feel like this part's just kind of floating under the wooden piece. Now just double check your normal nut back here. You know, don't be afraid to explode your mesh if you end up getting artifacts like this. It just helps to avoid that. And same here, you just go ahead and add some nice dirt and detail around these sections, you know, especially the inner parts. You could even decrease the color of this slightly just to give you a bit of a visual push. And when it comes to myself working on this kind of stuff, I usually would have like the high poly mesh, the low poly mesh with UVs. Then I would duplicate the low poly mesh, create the exploded version, and do my bakes off that. So you avoid kind of just like these visual artifacts happening. And again, I can see that your seam is under the weapon, which is really smart, considering it's not going to be an area that's visible to the player, so it allows you to kind of just hide that naturally from them. This back section is really nice. I'd probably go and just add some roughness variation in the center, just to kind of rough it up a wee bit. And again, just watch your smoothing groups. You can see there's some pinching happening here, just something to keep an eye on. You know, and for like another tip for you would be the smaller the geometry on your high poly, I always would kind of go and inflate the edges as much as I can, because if you think about the size of that piece versus the bake, sometimes what will happen is, depending on the texture resolution you're using, if these take up small real estate in your UVs and you do your bake, you're not going to capture a lot of really nice detail in that bake because of how small those UVs are. So you can either try to scale them up a wee bit, or you can inflate the edges on your high poly, so when you do your bake, you just hold up way better. Especially if you're going to be using this weapon and looking down the barrel. Just a lot of those little things just kind of add overall to just the quality. But overall, definitely on the right track. I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what's ahead. I suppose we can check out this. Yeah, the Caldwell conversion from Hunt Showdown. Again, huge fan of this game as well, and huge fan of the weapon art and just the art direction in general. It's just so cool. It's so unique as well. So I like this. This is really cool. It's like a bone slash kind of like a ceramic handle. It reads really cool. I can see that you really kind of went for that Hunt Showdown, kind of like just mud all over the weapon. A really cool tip would be to see if you could get away with maybe, instead of having this much visual noise on the surface, maybe you could sculpt like wood pieces, like, or like mud variants, just of like little gunks of mud, and just place it on your high poly, and then do like your low poly bake with that extra geo. So like you'd have the handle, and then you just have like the mud mesh kind of sitting on top of it. It just means the surface on the goal section will be not as noisy and a lot cleaner. and then you'll have kind of that visual push between like, so you'll have the handle or like the trigger guard section, and then you'll have like the mud kind of on top of it. It just would just some really cool detail. And same with the trigger as well. Like, don't be afraid to go in and just add somewhere in the trigger handle, because you would assume that in this kind of universe that the guy firing this would get a lot probably around the trigger as you have it, and then along around the hammer as well. You know, and again, I'd probably go in and just inflate these edges just a wee bit more, because again, when the further you get, the tighter those edges get, and they just look a lot sharper. And again, just watch the smoothing groups, and don't be afraid to go in ZBrush or another application and just kind of add just little dings and knocks to the actual like barrel section. So, you know, you could just kind of add just little like knocks along the edge. Maybe some discoloration around where the weapon gets fired, like where the Ryan exits the chamber. You can see that a lot of mud inside, which is really cool. It's a very nice touch. But yeah, I mean, this stuff's great. It's really on the right track. It's looking really, really nice. I guess for me, looking at this, if I was looking at this from kind of like a studio's point of view of hiring someone, two things I would want to see for this is your trice count, wireframe, and your UVs. And you could do that by just basically having like shots of it in the UV format, and then just like the trice count underneath it, and then just have like your UVs, and maybe just like a visual of like the UVs checkered applied to your mesh. You can kind of see the texel density, make sure it's consistent across the mesh. And I feel just with a lot of those little feedback notes and pointers, I feel like you'd honestly be able to push this way further. But it's definitely on the right track. Awesome. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what's ahead. And again, if you have any questions on this, you can always reach out to me on Discord under the game development channel, and I'll always be happy to check out your work and provide feedback. Next, we have Alvaro Garcia, Liverpool, United Kingdom. So Alvaro reached out over Discord about his steampunk environment and final master's degree project. Awesome. Let's check it out. Cool. So I think the first thing that kind of stands out to me, this Alvaro, when I check this out, is like, I can see kind of like in this guy here, you have like these, like the horizontal tiling going on in the concrete. I'd probably bring this down a little bit, because I just feel like these are quite large in comparison to like just everything else around that area. So if you look like this wooden plank, this top section, like these are basically huge compared to that. And if you think about a character walking along here, like these would be a lot smaller. So I'd probably scale these down about 20-30%. Your lighting's really nice, and the way that you've added rain on Unreal as well was really cool. I'd probably give more chamfers to this guy. I can see there's slight faceting occurring along it. So if I was to go in, I'd probably just, you know, chamfer this, smoothing these edges out just a wee bit more, and then just update the UVs for that. And I do notice at this part, you do have like this consistent edgeware flow. In reality, I don't think like a surface object like this would have that. It would be very much kind of, you know, general sort of contact, or kind of maybe just like around where it meets the building, and just, you know, areas like that. So I'd probably just reduce this a wee bit and kind of just revisit where you apply this. I can see here that you've used the decal, which is really nice. I think one thing would be really cool is just to see some vertex painting. You can see that you have some like vertex painting happening in terms of adding wetness to like the ground, which is really cool. But I feel like instead of like taking the approach of adding like a decal, I'd probably go in and create another material variant and use the shader and Unreal to just sort of like paint that in around these areas. So like it allows you to basically like place this guy, and instead of using like this decal and like this mesh bundle, you could go in and just paint all of that kind of just general edgeware, or that, sorry, wear around this instead on the surface. So it could be dirt or just rust, or it could be just concrete. Like, you have a lot of this cracked up like tile, not tile, sorry, brick, and then just like this concrete section as well. I do like that you have a lot of moss coming through that. I think that's a really nice touch. And again, just watch your wood grain flow. Yeah, this is cool. So, difficult steampunk style creation of 3D asset textures also implement many optimization profiles to be playable 60 FPS. Combine AO metallic reference textures. Okay, so you used your mass textures for this. Cool. LD certain assets. Tiling textures for vertex painting. Really good job. Did entire elimination process while second UV textures, light maps. That's a really good point. On that, it's always important. I always say to juniors, make sure that you know how to do light map UVs and to create them in the most efficient manner. Make sure you know how to create custom collision meshes for Unreal, and make sure you know how to create custom LEDs if you need them. And the key and tip to creating custom light map UVs for Unreal is the less UV islands you have, the better. So when you do your first UV pass in Unreal, don't be afraid to go in and just start kind of merging where you can to simplify those islands down, because it just provides you more opportunity for light map padding. Okay, parallax techniques in the windows. That's really cool. I guess I'd be curious to see how you created the buildings. Did you create like modular kits that you kind of just like place beside each other to kind of construct these guys, or is this all like one massive building that you've exported as an FBX from Max with material IDs applied? I think when it comes to creating this stuff, that if you're trying to build like, especially if you're trying to build a big scene for like a college project or just a tight deadline, the more that you can kind of merge into like modular kit sets, the better. So, for example, you could have like this side wall with like one of these lights, and then you could have a section of railing part with like the bollards. That could be just one modular kit that you're just repeating. And then you can also that could also just allow you to go in then and just create variants where maybe one of these guys, one of the lights are broken. Maybe there's like a chunk of concrete missing from the platform. Maybe it's missing one of the chain links. Maybe the chain link is lying on the floor. And just a lot of stuff allows for like storytelling and just a lot of narrative. I just find sometimes when you have a lot of this repeating stuff, it's just you can see the repetition very easily in it. Same with this guy here. You have this, once you chamfer that out, you have like the connection set or the parts that connect it. Maybe there could be a few missing. Maybe if it's wooden, maybe there could be a brick hanging down. Maybe you could have just another set dressing underneath it, or a section of this is like on the floor and there's just like dirt and debris around it. Same with these like overhang. It looks like corrugated metal. I can see that you kind of have that going on here, where you have like a section of it that's like clean, and then you have one that has like a piece that's kind of hanging out, and then you have some like wooden planks here. So that's definitely the right idea to go about it. I would like to see, I think one thing I would really like to see with this, Alvaro, is kind of just like a breakdown of the assets that you've used and seen, and kind of just more of like an in-depth, like, wireframe, UV layout, trice count. I think that stuff would really kind of just show overall. I mean, the composition's really nice, but it would be good just to kind of like see a breakdown of each of the assets as well. And again, for like this part here, like don't be afraid to utilize additional geometry where need be, just to make sure that everything just flows a lot nicer. But yeah, I mean, this is definitely on the right track. It's looking really good. I just feel a lot of those like little inputs, and just adding where you can, even if it's simply just kit bashing existing assets and just doing it in such a way that allows you to repeat it around your scene. A, you're saving draw calls. B, you're saving like GPU memory because you don't have to pull in additional textures and materials. And you're only paying for meshes, which are a lot cheaper. And you could have 10 meshes in your scene and only using one texture set, which is absolutely ideal. And if you created some of these guys in Designer, it would be really cool to see a breakdown of that as well, of like just separate render shots, node based, or like your node kind of layout. I just feel like adding a lot of that additional stuff would really kind of help to sell us and sort of like give like potential employers a real insight to kind of your ability and how you assemble scenes. You could always show like maybe just kind of like a step by step, like, oh, this is like the white box. Maybe this is when we went to proxy phase and added, you had the white box, and maybe this was just like a square in the white box, but then the proxy, maybe you just added this railing section, the walkway on the top, and then you brought it to like art, which is like, you do your high poly, or if you're using tiles, you do your low poly and UVs. And just a lot of that stuff would really help to kind of just show your thought process and your step by step, along with like real world reference as well. If there's anything that you use to kind of really to riff off for this, that would be really important as well. So I can see you use Quixel Megascan to Quixel Mixer. I'm assuming that's for a lot of your terrain work as well. And even shots of that would help a lot. Maya, ZBrush. Cool. Yeah, I mean, I feel like with all those little feedback notes, like this would definitely be really kind of ready for proper review, both from your college and for potential employers as well. And this is a quiet place. 3 months. Cool. So I'd say just be careful on your textures in this one. I can see that they just feel like the composition and the modeling is really nice, but they just feel quite low res. And either low res or just very noisy. So just watch the sharpening on the normal detail, or really just try and maybe pull back on it. Again, I think this is really cool. You have like this wooden bark with like the gold kind of column and brackets around it. I think that's a really cool touch. Okay, awesome. So you show some of your high poly sculpts with like the column section. That's really nice. So how you have to basically assemble this is definitely how you should showcase your other environment. Especially like, you have these breakdowns. Because I know in Quixel, it's not really the same as Substance, so you could even go in and just kind of show like a screenshot of just the settings you use for each of these guys. I think this is really cool that you have all these variants. Nice. Okay, so you're showing your albedo, your normal, your curvature, and your AO. I think what would be really cool for this is just that's your roughness map. Okay. So if I was to want to like inspect this asset, what would be really cool is a few angle shots of the asset itself, have just like a little wireframe variant of it, and your trice count, and then have your textures side by side, have your albedo, your normal, and your mask texture. I wouldn't really be by your mask texture, I could judge your metalness and your roughness. I could see where you've added all those details, because I could see that, okay, all these little subtle details here won't be in your metalness, they'll be in your roughness, so they'll still come through in your mask texture. But overall, it's really nice. Like, I like how you've added all this detail. I'd probably just kind of just watch out for, just as a nitpicky feedback note, just watch out for all these little seams. Just make sure that they kind of like fall off and end. For example, you got this guy here. If you think about this asset being repeated side by side by side, if you were looking at it, you could see like this guy here, for example, would be repeating, and it would just look very repetitive. So the way I do is when I approach assets, like details like this are important because they're an important part of what, like a representation of the asset and maybe what is a part of it. But when it comes to like just general dirt and stuff, I try to always do it in such a way where if an asset is placed side by side, it just doesn't look like it's repeating. because that offers you a lot of variation and to go in and actually place and rotate meshes in such a way. Another cool idea would be to add like a mask texture for this guy, so maybe you can mask out like the red, and you could have variants where maybe this is green or blue, depending on the scene that you're creating. And I think again, this is really nice that you have kind of this like layout, and I can see now why you're running into like a low resolution with this guy here, because the mesh is so big and scene. What's happening is when you're doing UVs for that, you can see the textile density of this is actually a lot different to the rest, which is why it stands out and looks a lot more low res. So what I would probably do if I was doing like this guy as a high poly, I'd probably go in and I would probably give it 2 texture sets. I don't think I would put this on a single texture set. I'd probably go in and gosh, that is a tricky one. You know, this guy here, you could probably blur the front and back of it, you know, or at least try and get away with that. The inside of this guy, you could probably mirror the inside of this. You know, I think when it comes to assets like this, it's always important to kind of think, okay, I need to get this into like a, you know, a 4K texture or like a 2048 by 490 or 4096 or vice versa. So, you know, the more kind of like rectangle your mesh is, the more ideal it is to kind of get this guy into like a 4096 by 2048. As when you put in like a 4K, it's just square, so you're trying to fit like a rectangle mesh into that, which means you're going to lose a lot of resolution. I'd say you could probably get away with, if you've done it that way, you could have like the back section of it as just like a UV layout, the bottom section's UV layout, and then you have like this kind of side chunk left that you could really use to kind of just add all these areas here. You know, and maybe if there's areas that aren't visible to the player or the player will never be able to get up to, you could shrink those islands down to allow you to scale up the rest that are visually visible to the player. So for example, if the camera is never going to get super close to this top point, you could scale those UVs down, and that would allow you then to increase the UV size of the parts the player would see, or even like these underneath the archways as well. So definitely just something to keep in mind. It's always little tricks around these things. And same with this guy here. You know, if you were doing UVs for this guy, I mean, the fact that this is a sculpt means it's probably going to be just completely unique, unless you're like making this a low poly and then using a tileable on it, which isn't ideal. So what you could do is you could go in, if you wanted this as a unique asset, you could go in and basically have this bottom section UV, and because it's square, you could just mirror the left and right, front and back. So it's just one UV layout for all sides, minus the top. And the bottom you probably would delete because it's not visible to the player. You know, the bracket, the cylindrical bracket column on the bottom and top, that could just be one UV layout and bake, and then you just basically just take it from here and just duplicate it, place it up here. You know, and then again, this could be 4096 by 2048 layout rather than it being a 4096 by 4096. And the reason is, again, because it's quite tall, if you were to put this on the side, it would be very rectangle in shape. And therefore, your UVs have to kind of align with that. You wouldn't really be able to go in and just put this in 4K texture. I mean, theoretically, you could, but you would still be losing a lot of resolution compared to if you did, you know, rectangularly. So I mean, this guy here, this would be totally fine for like a 4K layout. I can see that there is, the one thing that does confuse me looking at this is I can see there is repeating sections here, and I assume these are to do with this part, under here, under here, under here, under here. So what you could do is, the one thing to always remember when you're creating assets like this, Alvaro, is that a player is never going to see two sides of this guy at once. I mean, hypothetically, they can see the front and the side, but they'll never see the left or the back part of it. So that allows you to either A, go in where you can literally just UV this section off and just repeat the UVs. So you have the front section, back, the right and left. So when you look at your layout here, instead of having 1, 2, 3, 4, you would just have 1, and that would just basically be mirrored the whole way around it. Same with this guy here, you could do the exact same. So instead of paying for 4 EVs, you're only paying for 1 EV. That's basically just mirrored on top, so you're saving a lot of space. Same with this guy here. You could even half your cylinder and just mirror one side of it and symmetrically flip it over. The only risk with that is you'll run into a scene going vertically, so just make sure maybe it's in an area where maybe you can rotate it off screen so the player doesn't see it. And the same here, if you clean this dirt up here and you just kind of have it as just generic dirt, you could go in and just do the exact same here, where you basically just pay for 1 UV layout, so you have the front back laid out as 1 UV and the right and left, depending on the scale. And if you're working on like this guy here, for example, you could just literally, you could basically have like the side section and the side railing just basically flipped over. So you're only paying for a UV layout for this guy, for one of these guys, for this guy, and you're basically just flipping that over in your low poly, baking it down, and just repeating these columns just up the ways. And in doing that, it'll just allow you to push the resolution much further with this. But definitely, definitely good. It's definitely on the right track. And I probably just kind of just look at your vegetation a wee bit, maybe just add some discoloration to it, go in and maybe just add, using alpha that you have for your vegetation, just go in and just add even just some kind of like, maybe some of the leaves are kind of torn and ripped a wee bit. It probably wouldn't hurt if this isn't Unreal to just apply some SSAO to your script, to your environment with post-processing value, because what that will do is it will help to marry like these column sections with like the platform, or for example, you would kind of get like this nice AO along the edge down here around the bottom floor tile. Because as you know, like you can either do this two ways. You can go in and use SSAO, or you can go in and just vertex paint some dirt detail around these guys. That's obviously the more expensive option, but it just would help to marry things and you're seeing much better. And I would avoid decals like this as well, because I feel like when you scale this guy up, it probably looks low res compared to the textures. So I'd probably, instead of doing this, I'd probably go in to your high poly or your low poly. I mean, depending on how you've set it up, and either sculpt some edge wear in and cracks and dents in your high poly and bake that down, or in your low poly just add more vertices and edge loops and just vertex in some of that kind of variation on your surface. But overall, it looks really, really nice, Alvaro. It's definitely on the right track. I just feel with those feedback notes, like this will really kind of hit the next level in terms of quality. Next, we got Mimic, 7 months ago. First hard service project, art school, presenting a marmoset, like that's important. Again, one thing that kind of stands out to me is sharp. Like if I was to do this, I would really inflate it to see the read a lot better in the distance. Your bit's pretty nice. I have to give you that. They look really good. Again, because I feel like there's so much purple and purple and purple, it would just allow you opportunity to go in. Maybe you could kind of like this kind of like dark plastic or melt you have going on here. You can maybe add to like the center area somewhere. Like that you have kind of like this brass against the purple. It just kind of gives it a bit of variation. Again, probably just inflate your edges on your high poly, because these just feel very, very sharp. And I feel as well with the layout of your texture, or your UV layout, I feel like you're wasting a lot of space, which is why you're kind of getting this low resolution coming through on it. I mean, when you look at the amount of UV islands you're using, if you break this character down, for example, you could go in and just basically do one arm and just duplicate that over to the left side, do one leg, duplicate it over. You know, the back panel, if this is like separate geometry pieces, just do the exact same. You know, same parts of the head. You know, you could basically symmetrically just do one side of this guy and just flip it over. And I mean, the reason that you could do that as well is if you think about it, you have a lot of the center detail that would probably hide any visible seams. So by all means, you could do that, and it means you're basically saving a ton of UV space, which means you can bump the resolution up and it just will read a lot nicer. And as we can see here in the concept, that the edges are just a lot smoother and more round, and they just feel very sharp on the end product. So again, I go in and just kind of, you know, chamfer the edges on your high poly and just revisit the bake. So a lot of that kind of like just general curvature and edge roundness kind of translates over to like your bakes and low poly, so they don't feel as sharp. I'd probably mess with the purple. I'd probably give it some blue hues around it as well, and I just feel it's very purple and purple compared to the concept. Yeah, I just feel with just extra bit of time in this guy, you definitely have him up there. I mean, it's a good start, but I just feel it just with a little bit more attention and care, it'll definitely be hitting the quality bar. Awesome. Well, that wraps up today's live stream, and thank you guys so much for checking in. And I really appreciate your time and appreciate the submissions. And yeah, as always, I look forward to seeing what you guys create next. And every time I look at the art on this, it just seems to get better and better, which is really, really inspiring. And yeah, have a wonderful rest of your Monday and week. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out on the Game Development Rookies Discord channel. And I'm always available to either review your work or answer any questions you have. All right, have a wonderful rest of your day.